Two friends meet up to drink some beers and talk about past times. Not yesterday, but long ago, it's scandals, wars and crimes. From Stalin's reign to Prohibition, Tudors, Pompey, Bush and NASA's mission, Edison's bulk, Genghis Khan's rise to victory. Forget your old teacher, it's time for Pint-Sized History.
Hi there, I'm Joe.
And I'm Zack.
And welcome to Pint-Sized History, where we talk through the landmark events that shape the modern world we live in, and with a few refreshing beverages.
I forgot about the beers.
What do you mean? You're literally just taking a swig from
I know.
How'd you forget?
I forgot we always do a little parade.
Today I've got a Krabby's, and it really doesn't have much to do with... I mean, it's a British beer. It's from Edinburgh. But I just felt like having a ginger beer that was alcoholic, so that's why
Oh, is it? I didn't know it was alcoholic. I thought it was just like a soft drink.
Alcoholic ginger beer, right there.
And I'm having a Kronenberg Blanc 1664 Blanc, I'd say. And it's actually, I didn't realize that Kronenberg did this, but it's like a wheat beer that the Kronenberg line with a hint of citrus. And you might be wondering why I've got a French beer. That's because today we're going to 1916 for the Battle of the Somme, which is an incredibly important landmark battle in World War One.
Yes. The
battle is very well known for being the highest amount of British casualties in basically military history.
Right, that's actually the first question I was going to ask was, am I right in thinking that the Somme, or at least the first day of the Somme, is the worst day in British military history?
Oh, the worst day is so horrible.
By far.
I find it really hard with the Somme, and I've texted you about this in run-up to actually researching it and doing this podcast together, but it's so horrible. Like, it's about as morbid and like brutal as war can get. Like morally, the fighting's awful, but like, you know, it's not anywhere near what like Stalingrad was. But like the moral elements of it and the aspects of it and World War One in general, it's all just so haunting.
One of the horrific things about World War One, which is a war that we haven't touched on so far in all episodes, we haven't done anything on World War One, and I think one of the main things that people think immediately when they think about World War One is trench warfare. And in terms of battlefields and battlegrounds that you could possibly have a fight in, the trenches just seem like one of the absolute worst. Jesus, I mean, the concept of fighting in these types of environments is
hold your horses. Hold your horses.
I'm not spoiling anything by saying trench warfare is bad, man.
Yeah, but you know, I've got a whole segment dedicated to trench warfare.
I won't say any further. I'll just say that I can imagine for the Somme, it's like the worst of the worst. That's my guess.
As always, with our episodes, if you've enjoyed watching Pint-Sized History or do enjoy watching it or enjoying what you hear right now, which I imagine you are, please remember to like, subscribe, drop us a review on wherever you're watching it, and just share us to your friends and family, because or anyone else, just strangers on the street if you perchance happen upon that, because you know it helps get the word out, and then we can make better, more exciting episodes.
Absolutely,
that's all I've got.
So the reason that we have decided to do this episode at the moment, we always wanted to do a World War One episode, didn't we? There's so many different interesting facts about World War One. It's something we're both really interested in. But,
not touched on enough, I say.
No, absolutely. It's unlike many other conflicts, especially World War II. World War One doesn't really get the light of day that sometimes it should. And we felt it was important to discuss it, especially now, because Remembrance Day is coming up very soon. So it was important.
We will remember them.
Especially from a British perspective, the Somme was just so brutal. And it's a huge part of British military history and just British history. And we're happy to be able to talk about it. I don't know that much about the Somme, so it's nice to be able to talk about it and learn a bit more about just how horrific it is, and hope that something like that never happens again to any country, especially our own.
Let's give a brief overview of the Somme, where in France it is, the importance of the battle, and how long it went on for. Just give a bit of background about what we're talking about, where we're talking about, and when we're talking about.
We're talking about World War One, right?
Yes, so World War One happened from 1914 to 1918. It involved England, Germany, France, Russia, Italy, Austria-Hungary, which is Austria-Hungary Empire.
The sides were Russia, France, the UK, Serbia, and then Austria-Hungary.
Very knowledge that.
Honestly, I don't know much about World War One. It's actually one of the things I really don't know much, but I do know that. And then it's Austria-Hungary, Germany, and
the Ottoman Empire,
and the Ottomans, but Italy, not with us, aren't they? The Brits.
Yeah. Those Italians. I mean, I know you're like well drilled into their culture right now.
They'll go to any side, man. They're just here for a fun time.
You got the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance, and the Triple Entente is Britain, France, Russia. The Triple Alliance is Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Ottoman Empire.
Right.
So the Somme is also referred to as a Somme Offensive because it's not just a one-day thing; it's a 4-month-long battle, basically. It involves many smaller battles, but the large front is the Somme River.
Yeah.
It starts on the 1st of July 1916 and ends later on the 18th of November 1916. So it's considered one of the bloodiest events of World War One, and it's kind of breathtaking, just like the scale of human. It's basically like the first time ever like warfare's ever been conducted on an industrial scale.
Yeah, meat grinder type stuff.
Absolutely, and it's just haunting. So the main thing with the Somme is you'll learn this as we go through it, is that it's characterized by the senior military leadership and the lack of preparedness among them. The ideas of like learning how to fight war in the 20th century.
Yes.
How war's developing, machine guns, mortars, the development of the tank later in this battle, which you'll find really exciting as we get there. And we see like at first hand the inefficiencies of generals leading their men telling them to walk over the lines and getting mowed down in the tens of thousands. So it's brutal.
You can't even imagine it. It's so ridiculous, isn't it?
And here's a little tidbit. Just by the time the offensive was abandoned in the middle of November, the Allies had advanced only 5 miles. In that time, 650,000 Germans were killed, 420,000 Brits were killed, and 200,000 French were killed. And to set the scene, just for what's to come in this episode, Donald Murray, who served in the 8th Battalion, the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry Regiment, gave an account of the fighting. It seemed to me eventually that I was just one man left. I couldn't see anybody at all. All I could see was men lying dead, men screaming, men on the barbed wire with their bows hanging down, shrieking. I thought, what can I do? I was just alone in a hell of fire and smoke and stink, and so I began to creep back towards the line, through shell holes, through the mud, and down into the trench, and still there was nobody there.
Wow. Jesus.
How'd you feel?
Strange, really. I'm really looking forward to this because, like I say, the Somme is not something I particularly know much about. I know the obvious stuff, but I really don't know that much of the ins and outs, and I can only imagine with my own mind the barbarity, but I know that whatever I can imagine, it's 1,000 times worse. So I'm prepared. I'm ready to go. Let's do this.
Cool. Can you tell me what the world was like pre-1914, before the start of the First World War?
In what sense?
What was going on? Paint a picture for me and the viewers. It's not your episodes.
God.
You weren't supposed to come prepared. But
There had never been, up to this point, a real opportunity on a grand scale for armies to learn how modern fighting weapons were used. At this point, there had been smaller skirmishes worldwide, but in general, there was not that much opportunity for people to bring out these guns and literally shoot at thousands of people in a line, you know, like on a, like you said earlier, an industrial scale. So the idea of World War One, not many people realized the scale and the barbarity that was about to take place. But similar to plenty of times in history, and kind of including today, the world was in a space of rearmament. Everyone was starting to purchase more weaponry. Everyone was focusing more on military spending. It was like everyone could feel that there was going to be a big conflict happening. Everyone could tell that was going to happen. And Germany was the most likely source.
yeah, I guess the question is whether you could feel that a war was coming, or whether the countries wanted a war to happen. You think, like, if you're spending that much money, part of your GDP, on defense spending, if you're recruiting hundreds of thousands of soldiers,
I think it's
from the workforce, you think like there's some desires there. There's not
for
like
sure.
there's not like a chance suggestion that the world's gonna like fall into war.
No, but that's not, I more mean for the average person, they can feel it. Yes, it's not like it is just luck. Of course, it's never luck. These things happen because people were pushing for it to happen. It's escalation, which we've talked many times before. But from the perspective of the average person that is not involved in the military spending of countries, they could just see, they can feel, they can read the newspaper that places are rearming, places are building, you know, ships and weapons and, you know, Jeeps. I don't know, were Jeeps a thing?
Jeeps not a thing.
No, I think it's just cars, vehicles, you know, ways to transport stuff. Everyone was preparing as if something big was going to happen.
Yeah. It was a world of empires. You have the British and French empires, who are powerful entities colonizing regions like India, Vietnam, the Western North Africa, stretching basically across the globe.
Right.
So this is probably like considered the peak of power for the British and French empires. This period of diplomatic relations in Europe at this time is known as the Concert of Europe. It's a term for keeping the geopolitical order the same, and it was decided by the main players back in 1814 that they wouldn't expand or take any more territory or try and change the face of what Europe looked like. And this kind of was supposed to be in existence from 1814 to 1914, but this was not a stable period. There were wars constantly. You had the Franco-Prussian Wars, you had the Crimean Wars, the Russo-Turkish Wars. So the big players in Europe and Western Europe, because Germany's not Germany at this point, it's Prussia, Prussia and other German states. So everyone's kind of fighting. There's revolutions, national unifications happening, and Europe changed significantly over this time of this concert of Europe. It changed from being basically unrecognizable before 1814 to what it looked like at the start of the First World War.
Yeah.
As the countries develop and the countries unify, like Italy and Germany, foreign policies change. It kind of shifts to a more imperialistic, colonialist expansionism. There's the battle for the race for Africa, as everyone starts to colonize different regions there.
Yeah.
This, like you said before, brings to existence an arms race. As Germany now recently unified under Otto von Bismarck,
Yes.
Rapidly builds up its economic and industrial strength.
Makes them a powerhouse very quickly.
Yeah. They try and actually match the navy that the British have. They think that the way
You're taking the piss, lad. Trying to match our navy.
Yeah.
No one can fucking do that. Good fucking luck for you Germans.
So they do that. They think like the way.
Oh, Britannia. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean it's testament to how much we love our navy that it's Britannia ruled the waves.
There's not many things we get right, but the navy is something we smash every time, man.
So they ultimately fail because the British are also very technologically intuitive or innovative, I guess is the word you say. We eventually built the HMS Dreadnought, which gave us a technological advantage on the waves, and the Germans basically decided this is a waste of money. Yeah, they're just better than us on the waves, on the seas. So they started focusing on their army. And this was because basically the Russian Empire have such a vast army. They've actually recently lost to the Japanese in a battle in 1904, but following that, they built up their army again with just dramatic ease, like really, really simply built up hundreds of thousands of men into a massive standing army. And the Germans are aware of this and they're scared about this.
Yep.
Europe is in this sort of weird state where everyone's kind of building up their armies and developing technology, and the people, the rulers and state leaders at hand, they're kind of itching to get a chance to use it.
Yep.
And following on from this, there's a big thing in Europe. There is the stability of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So this is another big player in Europe at the time. It's basically Austria, Hungary, parts of
surprising.
Yeah.
Austria-Hungary. Yeah, damn. Hey, I know. Let's put our names together. Couldn't think of anything more imaginative.
But also
Jesus.
Yugoslavia and like the Balkan states,
God.
which is like Greece, Macedonia, Serbia, Bulgaria.
They all love each other,
yeah,
right?
they get on
They get on
perfectly well. And the friendships between Balkan states will have no bearing on the future of history, I'm sure.
Let them cook.
The Balkan states are called the powder keg of Europe.
They actually.
Yeah, they actually are. This is because there's loads of different countries in that region. There's like 11 different countries in this region who famously don't get along very well.
No.
And now we get to a huge landmark event. You gonna tell me what it is?
Take me out. Da-na-na-na-na-na. Franz Ferdinand.
Yeah.
Legend.
Well, I mean,
What a band. What a band. Also a great name for a band as well. I love that they've literally named
why
it
have they
after.
done that?
Why wouldn't you do that?
Like, it's pretty fucked up when you think about it.
Is it?
Yeah.
Enough time has passed. You can name it, but what if you named a band like...
I don't think enough time has passed. I think it's horrible.
Nah, I think it's all right. I reckon in 50 years there'll be like
Adolf
a
Hitler's.
Mussolini. No, Hitler's too far. There's no way someone's naming their band Adolf Hitler. But they could do like a Mussolini or a Hirohito. Imagine a band called Hirohito. That would be cool.
No, but you get the Churchills or something.
Yeah, that probably is a Churchill band. Anyway,
Gavrilo Princip. Do you know who he is?
is he the Serbian that killed him?
He is, yeah, absolutely spot on. You've ruined it for everyone watching, but
So
he's a Bosnian Serb student, and he was inspired by assassination attempts on imperial officials and invigorated by Austrian crackdown on Serbian freedoms. This inspired him to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austrian-Hungary throne.
oh, was he heir?
Yeah, he's heir.
Yeah, makes
Which is
sense.
crazy because I guess like kings are really important this time in history.
Yep.
Kings. I mean, you've got like the Habsburg families, which essentially rule Europe at this time.
Yeah.
I think basically all the royal families are related.
Kind of interlinked,
Yeah,
yeah. It's
they were
because
like-
of Queen Victoria, man.
Is it?
She was, her and her husband had like 5 kids that, or I don't know how many, and then married them off to all these different families.
Ah.
That's why so many of the German, the English, and the Russian aristocracy, like the kings, look the same. Literally look these.
Really?
Like, yeah, like have you looked at a picture of Tsar Nicholas II?
No.
The king of Russia, and then looked at the dad of the Queen's granddad. They look like the same, basically. They
Really?
literally look identical. It's the same with the German one as well.
I have to look at that. On the morning of Sunday, 28th of June, 1914, at around 10 a.m. in Sarajevo, the Archduke's motorcade, strolling through the town, comes under attack from a number of would-be assassins. However, due to either inaction or faulty preparation, they have failed in the attempt. That said, part of the motorcade was actually bombed. One of them had bombs on them. They threw a bomb at the first car on the motorcade. So the motorcade rushes off to the town hall. Sarajevo mayor wants to bring the army in and escort them out. But they didn't do that. They didn't wait.
No.
And I think the Archduke actually kind of... he starts insinuating that Sarajevo is not a safe space and like insults the mayor of Sarajevo. He's like, how dare you suggest that my town is full of assassins? Well, yeah, at this point it is. At around 10:45 a.m. on the Archduke's return journey, the driver accidentally stalls the car after realising he was going the wrong way, bringing the car to a sudden stop 1.5 meters in front of Gavrilo Princip. The luck. The world is hanging on this.
Who at this point had probably just like given up on the idea. He was probably like, well, didn't get him. Yeah, that's a shame. Maybe we'll get him next week or something.
We'll get him next time.
And then and he just starts walking home or goes to get a drink or something, and he's just like, hold on a fucking minute.
That's the Archduke.
Is that who I think it is?
Gavrilo Princip then steps onto the car and shoots at the Archduke and his wife.
Steps onto it.
There's like a step to get onto the car.
Yeah.
So he steps onto it and fires from point blank range, killing the both of them. Wow. He was caught, tried, and later died in custody from tuberculosis. Austria-Hungary are furious. Their heir to the throne has been assassinated, and this leads to a bit of opportunism as they look to use this involvement of a Serbian assassin as an excuse to invade Serbia. Austria-Hungary give a list of 10 unacceptable demands to Serbia as an excuse for starting hostilities. They then break off diplomatic relations and on 28th of July 1914 declared war on Serbia. This is because they're kind of buoyed by the fact that the Germans will support them in any battle. They know that they can go in there and start a war, and they're probably the backing of the rest of the Allied powers, the Triple Alliance this time. Russia, though, having a defensive agreement with Serbia, mobilise their forces on the 30th of July and declare war on Austria-Hungary. Germany, on the 1st of August, then declare war on Russia, rejecting a demand of neutrality by the French. On the 2nd of August, Germany then occupy Luxembourg, and on the 3rd of August, they declare war on the French. On the 4th of August, they invade Belgium, who Britain have a guarantee of independence and neutrality for. And Britain then sent Germany an ultimatum to leave Belgium. And on midnight, what make it the 5th of August, Britain formally declare war on Germany.
Yeah.
The world's at war in the stage of basically what is a month. It goes from the assassination of one prince to the throne to every major country in Europe.
Of a minor nation as well. In terms of the grand scale of power in Europe, it's so interesting that a prince, not even the king, but a prince of a smaller nation ends up being the trigger point, because diplomacy is so important in European politics, this theatre or concert rather, of juggling power. And then you've finally got so many people backing different horses to go, well, I have to defend these guys. If anything happens to them, I'm defending them. I have to defend these guys. And it's just like, you can see, if you have any idea about like politics at that time, you'll see it in front of you. You'll go, but hold on, if they do this, then they'll do this. Then if they do this, then they'll say I'm defending them. And then if they say they're defending them, then they'll get involved. So it's like everyone can see it's about to happen. But when the cogs are turning, it's so difficult to stop them.
It doesn't make a difference. Like if the Archduke dies, the Archduke doesn't die. War's still breaking out.
Yeah.
Like at some point, it could be anything. Just one little spark for the ignition.
It might not have been for a few more years, but it was quite clear
it would have come.
Yeah,
it's not sustainable, I think, to have that much money poured into your army. You can't. Eventually, it will catch up to you. You know, the public and civilians will just have a far worse living standard.
Yeah.
Which is why armies aren't armed in peacetime. You know, it's expensive to run a military. It's expensive to develop technologies and build tanks and airplanes. Not that they existed at this point in time, but there's a reason why our army is only like 80,000 people or something like that at the moment.
Yes,
we don't need it.
Well, I mean, we don't need it anyway. We're not an army nation.
No,
but I see your point.
We're boats. We're navy.
We are,
but apparently, we have far less boats than most countries. I looked at
our boats are sick though.
Yeah,
they're
fucking good boats.
They're good
We're
boats.
the best boats.
The best boats around.
It's not like Trump.
And And
we had the best boats.
we've got aircraft carriers with sick planes as well. We've got sick Air Force, sick boats, sick planes, flyy, swimmy, we're good. It's just landy stuff. We're not.
We're not great on land.
No,
Yeah.
that's not our thing.
I actually hate water as well. I'm not a big fan of the sea.
Me neither, man. So World War One has begun.
Yes, Joe. World War's begun. Scream for your life.
Well,
So
we'd be drafted, wouldn't we?
We'd be drafting in a heartbeat. We probably want to go.
That's a good point. Yeah,
and we'll get to this later because this is kind of what's haunting about the whole thing is that kids as young as 14 and 15 or 13 are just desperate to go join their mates and
well, there's just no there was no propaganda and belief in your country was so much more powerful then than it was at any point afterwards. World War One was certainly a turning point. I mean, people were still very patriotic, sign up during big events like World War Two and 9/11, but World War One was a real showcase of just pure patriotism and going, if there's a war, I want to be there.
So the Germans tried to quickly defeat the French in 1914. They failed to do so. They didn't want to fight a two-front war against the Russians and the French and the British. Yep. They get locked down in a two-front war, which is what they absolutely wanted to avoid. Yep. They're absolutely battering the Russians on the Eastern Front with the two battles of Tannenberg. They basically just killed millions of Russians, taking them prisoners, but they're still fighting there because the Russians have an enormous army. They're struggling in the Western Front, though. The Germans are halted at the River Marne, and trench warfare starts to dominate the Western Front. The Allies, on the other hand, try to fight back, go on the offensive with the Gallipoli campaign, which, as you know, ends in failure in 1915.
That's worthy of an episode in and of itself, Gallipoli.
It's fascinating, yeah. It's also a terrible campaign. This is the thing with all these First World War campaigns, all the battles, they're just horrible. They're just complete failures and atrocious waste of human life.
Barely anything gained and just
many dead.
Unbelievable loss of life. And you can say that about any conflict ever is, what are you gaining for people dying? It's never worth it. But World War One is like that, but on the extreme. You're gaining nothing and you're losing tens of thousands. Yeah. Maybe more.
So Italy then joins the war on the Allies side in May. Gas starts getting used widely, which is crazy. Chemical weapons are used widely in the Western Front. World War One is stuck. It's in a stalemate. There's just no advancement on either side. Yeah. But you kind of have these massive battles with huge numbers of men and manpower and equipment thrown at the other side, but no territorial gains emerge. Yeah. It's trench warfare.
Which wasn't initially planned. They didn't expect that this would just become trench warfare because this hadn't happened on such a big scale. But now that it had, and now that there was stalemate, and now you couldn't move any further, what else do you do but dig in? So trenches became a thing.
They're basically just a collection of foxholes. Every troop, every soldier at the time has a spade in them. They're called entrenching tools. Yeah. So what they'll do is they'll get under fire, or someone will start shooting at them, or some artillery will come over, and they'll start digging a foxhole. A foxhole is a short little... basically ditch where they can hide in. Yeah.
A hole that you can hide in, yeah.
They're dug quickly by individual troops using their spades. They get into those... they eventually line up their foxholes and they keep digging deeper. And this starts to form trenches. And then eventually you get... you can start digging deeper, getting field fortifications. You can really put some welly into it. You can create firing positions, bunkers. Mm-hmm. You can dig deeper and deeper. This is something the Germans did. They dug deep. They had really, really good trenches and fortifications. We had terrible trenches. They were not up to scratch. But the Germans, on the other hand, they dug into soft chalk, 30 feet down into the earth, so they could basically avoid all artillery fire. And when British troops eventually took these trenches and saw them, they're like, "What the hell?" Because they're fighting a defensive war, the Germans, because they know they can't really go on the offensive, so they're just putting all their time and money into these trenches. Right. During the First World War, the trenches extended from the Belgian coast all the way through northeast France into Switzerland, which is hundreds of miles of networks of trenches. They typically be zigzags, so you can't fire down them in one long row, and they're connected to a series of other trenches called reserve trenches and support trenches, auxiliary trenches, but basically which gives you food, mail, and orders can be delivered down them.
Yeah, the actual network of trenches. If you look if you search on Google a diagram of what they actually look like, it's quite interesting. Yeah. You've got it's like this mini microcosm world of very small tunnels that you're living in. You literally have the front line where you're preparing to fight or you're preparing to shoot the enemy if they come to you. Then you've got the auxiliary tunnels where they are essentially supply lines where men and supplies go through. And then you go further back and you've got supply places, you've got command stations, you've got beds, you know, where people sleep. Like, because, you know, unless you're on station and you're defending the front line, then you've got a lot of downtime if you're in a trench. So you need somewhere to chill. And the whole place is obviously horrific and disgusting. But if you're not on the front line, you can actually, you know, not worry so much about something being right in front of you and about to kill you. You can actually, you know, find a space in the mud to try and sleep. And, you know, even if they dig underground, you can have even possibly a bed, which is a luxury.
Yeah, but prevailing, they're horrible. They're disgusting. They're full of rats
Horrific.
and disease, and you commonly get what's called trench foot, which is like I think you get water in your shoe, and it basically is it like frostbite? I think it's
No, it's not frostbite. It's just that if your feet are wet, then especially with bad water like chemicals and stuff, then I think you can just get ill in a million different ways. Dysentery
horrible.
as well, another one.
Yeah.
Dysentery is very rife and often happens in trenches. You know, because there's not where do you go to the toilet? You know, there's especially if you're on guard for like 10 hours.
Yeah,
it's such a disgusting mess.
I guess we say in this podcast that we kind of talk about how the wars and the past shape the world we live in today, but in Russia and Ukraine right now, you know, trench warfare is emerging back on a massive scale.
Yeah,
and it's crazy to see, like, there's, because of the use of drones, it means you can't have what the future of war is, which is combined arms warfare, where you get tanks and planes or in unison with infantry, which makes trenches kind of redundant. Tanks made the trench redundant eventually.
Yes.
But because you can't really use them because of drones and different advancement of like rocket launchers, stuff like that, which can take out tanks like that, trenches are needed again.
They're now back.
Yeah,
it's
they're
like
back, baby.
An equalizer. It's unbelievable.
Woohoo!
And it's so funny because I'm sure, I mean, obviously, after every big major war, there's never again. But certainly after the First World War, I'm sure everyone said never again with trench warfare. I don't want to do that shit ever again.
I'm not getting back in one of those.
I'm not going back in that awful stuff. So it's kind of insane that's now a possibility that this stuff is now coming back.
So in front of each trench system, you have what's called as no man's land. Do you know what that is?
Yeah. No man's land is the area between the two trenches, essentially the place that you can't go, no men.
What would it look like?
Well, a lot of barbed wire,
Ooh.
Because
On the
that's,
money.
you want to stop people moving forward as much as you can. And then over time, you know, puddles, dead bodies, equipment, you know, it is essentially just this, it's literally like a hell, you know, a hellscape. If you can imagine what hell would look like on Earth, no man's land in the middle of trenches.
Get you close to it.
It's pretty close to it.
Yeah, you have dead animals, corpses. Sometimes I didn't realize this before researching it, but it actually be contaminated by chemical weapons. So you wouldn't be able to go in certain places of it. So it'd be like, you know, Caseus or something.
But the whole thing would be wet, especially because, like, you know, this is a conflict that's happening for years. So every type of weather is happening, you know, and sometimes the ground will be hardened, sometimes there'll be a slodgy mess, and not only the smell, but just imagine the the feeling of getting that like mud and dirty water, and it's just
you say that, but the start of Somme was a beautiful day. It was a lovely day. You might think otherwise had not been this fucking hellscape. So at the end of 1915, the Second Chantilly Conference happens, where the Allies agree on a strategy of combined offences. They basically want to line up their attacks. The French attacks, and the Russians attack, and the British attack, all at the same time, to put the pressure on the Germans, make them exhaust their manpower.
Makes sense with the limited tactics that they've got on offer. Makes sense.
Absolutely. So 1916 comes around, and while they have agreed to have an offensive in 1916, they do not expect the Germans to do what they do, which is advance on Verdun. And this causes the Battle of Verdun, which alongside the Somme is basically another fundamental battle of World War One. It's crazy. It's basically the Germans trying to take this fortified region in France, which is like a fortress area. And they think if they take that, then they can just go on to Paris. And that's the thing. They're told by all their senior leadership, they just take this one objective and then it's straight to Berlin. Yep. The war's going to end as soon as we win this battle, and this never happens. The French get locked down, hundreds of thousands of troops on either side. And the French, who are the senior partners in the alliance between the English, Russians, and the French, because they're the strongest at the time, I didn't realise this, they're the people who dictate what the policy looks like. So they basically order the British to conduct an offensive. The French basically want Sir Douglas Haig, who is the commander-in-chief of the Allied forces in the Western Front. They try and get him to bring up the offensive soon they want it to be. He wants it to be in August near Flanders, but they tell him, no, you got to go now, and we got to go because of this strategy, combined offensives, where our forces meet. Yep. And it just so happened that was on a place near the River Somme.
Yes.
And this is basically a 25-kilometer line. It's just, Yeah, around the north and southern bank of the Somme, where the French line meet the English lines, and this is where eventually all hell is about to break loose.
Yeah.
It means that the British have incredibly inexperienced men. They wanted to go in August because they wanted to have well-trained men. They don't have the same British expeditionary force from the start of the war. They've got what's called Kitchener's troops. And Kitchener is the man you might see who is, your country needs you with a moustache. Yeah. So they have like loads of these really eager volunteers who aren't a traditional army. They're not well experienced. They've done some training, but they're not as good as the army before them. And now he's got to use his inexperienced troops to go for this place they don't want to, fighting in a time they didn't want to against the Germans, which is just going to be horror.
And I imagine that the majority of these volunteers that are so keen to fight for Kitchener and the British are predominantly extremely young men, like teenagers. Basically, I imagine that makes up a huge proportion of this force because everyone wanted to join, everyone wanted to fight.
I don't have the statistics for you, but yeah, essentially, it's...
I mean, look, even if they're not teenagers, they're young.
They're young, yeah,
super young.
And we'll get onto this later, but a lot of them are from the same place. There's no there's no segregation of where you're fighting from.
Yeah,
you're fighting in the Accrington unit or the London unit.
God, isn't that so
crazy.
nuts, isn't it?
Crazy.
I mean, to be fair, again, this is another thing that you wouldn't know if you hadn't had a war of this scale before. Maybe if you were smart, you could have maybe thought of it, but it's just not a reality that people would have thought this far ahead. But in such a major conflict where so many people can die so quickly, if you create a legion of troops, you want them to like each other, to know each other. It'd be better if they were good mates. Then it'd be great. All these men from the same town sign up, like 20 young men that went to a school together, decided to sign up on the same day. Let's all go to war together, chaps. You want them to be together because why wouldn't you? Then what happens is they go as one unit and they all die, and suddenly an entire village's population of young men is just wiped out.
But they do train well.
They do train well.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, because they all know each other, they train excellently with each other. The morale's really high, and they have a great time.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That makes sense. So you'd think that from that concept that it would work. And then, of course, when World War I happens, this type of warfare happens, and they're like, oh, shit, what have we done? Oh, fuck.
But it's not just the soldiers on the ground. They've recruited really quickly because Lord Kitchener he basically thought the way to end the war would be mass recruitment, just recruit 1 million, 2 million men, and would just burst through the German lines. And that was his plan. But because of that, they don't have experienced staff. They don't have great leadership. They've got very few officers. They don't have non-commissioned officers who can lead the lines and act independently, which is really important in warfare in the 20th century, is making sure you have these small units of like really well-trained men with officers who can delegate a task on the ground and act independently. Think on their feet, and this just doesn't exist in this army. It's incredibly green. They basically lack the experience and decisiveness to make good on any breakthroughs, which is really important in World War I. If you get a breakthrough, you need to absolutely maximize on it. You can't just because the Germans will counterattack, which is part of their policy. Their policy is always, if you lose ground, counterattack, take it back. And they're not going to have the ability to fight back and then push on forwards, which is just the mark of World War I. What I find incredibly interesting is that the British Army is not just made up of Britons. It's a part of the Commonwealth.
Yes.
There's colonialist forces. Britain is an empire at this time. Do you want to talk about maybe some of the nations?
Well, I don't know. A lot of them. I could have a guess.
Why don't you guess the nations that are involved? The main, not the main, but some of the major players.
That's fairly. I think I can. India would be one. Canada. Australia. New Zealand.
Yep.
South Africa.
Yep.
How many more big ones do I need?
There's two more big ones.
I mean, are we even counting like Scotland? Is that
no? That's Britain.
Okay,
you're gonna fucking piss some people off with that one.
Well, that's sorry. What? Okay, two more. Hold on.
They're quite. I'll give you them because they're quite niche.
No. One's from. One will be the Caribbean.
Jamaica.
Jamaica.
The British West Indies.
British West Indies.
Well done.
Okay. Is that's one?
One more. It's near South Africa.
Yeah, it's gonna be an African one.
Starts with a Z.
Oh, not Zambia.
Nope.
Zanzibar?
No.
Oh, Zimbabwe.
Yes.
Right.
Maisie, you got them all.
Okay.
So they're the main. There's other, I imagine, smaller nations, but these are like the bulk of the forces. There are British soldiers from 5 different continents that fought during the First World War. Yeah. They're not always treated well by the British compatriots. They were allowed to practice their religion and eat their beliefs, but a lot of them weren't even able to train as officers. Indian soldiers weren't able to be treated by English nurses. Later, when India wanted independence after the war, the British cracked down on them despite their contribution. And there were over 140,000 Indian casualties in the First World War.
That's why I said India first, because India is the one I could remember.
Yeah, the Gurkha regiment.
The British Raj, in British India helped a lot with these conflicts. Yeah, I never really got its credit for it.
Let's now move on to the battle itself. We talked about the lead up. We talked about the state of the British forces and what it's like, why they have to conduct the war in this place and what the warfare is going to look like. The Somme River, it flows from an area in Picardy, which is in northern France, from Saint-Quentin to the English Channel. This is the place where the French and English forces meet on this 25-mile front along the river. The plans for the battle were for the 4th Army to break through the centre, while the 3rd Army in the north and the French 6th Army in the south made diversionary attacks. The reserve army would then exploit the breakthrough, and it would allow the Allied armies to walk to Berlin. So they would say, because this was along a Roman road near the Somme called the Albert Bapaume Road, so they would say first Bapaume, then Berlin.
Nice.
That's classic, isn't it? We win this battle, we win this war, we'll be home in no time.
We'll be home by Christmas.
Yeah.
Classic.
But they're not going to be home by Christmas.
No.
Very, very, if any of them do make it alive.
I was going to say, not many of them do anyway.
You said it's the bloodiest single day for casualties.
That was my guess.
It is. How many people do you think died? How many casualties in
the first day of the Battle of the Somme, how many British people died?
Yeah.
Well, this is a number I feel like I should know because I feel like it's quite well known. I've got a number in my head. I could be wrong. Is it 60,000?
You're absolutely right. It is 60,000. Well done.
I had that feeling it was.
And the horrible thing is, most of them died in about 30 minutes.
30 minutes?
Yeah, 30 minutes, yeah. It's horrible. So it's worth in this battle splitting it up into 3 sections. You've got the middle, which is the Albert Bapaume Road, which is this massive Roman road that kind of runs straight through the Somme River. And then either side, you've got the north side of the Somme and the south side of the Somme. And British, English, and German troops are kind of split along both the north and south banks of the Somme. On the north side of the battle, it is terrible. It's awful fighting. This is where the worst of the casualties happen. The plan basically involved a 7-day artillery barrage. The English army in this time had built up about 1.7 million artillery shells. So the plan was they're going to completely bomb the German defenses into oblivion. They're going to light up the German lines. They're going to destroy the bunkers, destroy the dugouts. There's just
disable them.
So much firepower. Like, how can they not? And importantly, they were going to also tear up the barbed wire doing so. A lot of the artillery had shrapnel in it, and the plan was that would just tear up the barbed wire in no man's land, so the British could essentially walk over the lines. And this did not work. The British guns were not heavy enough. The Germans were built into a chalk line defense, so basically they could dig in really deep. And while there were casualties in the Germans, a few thousand of sorts, there wasn't nearly the penetration and breakthrough that the British wanted in this. And a lot of them were still able to just get out there, man their guns, mow down the oncoming onslaught. Yeah. But in the south, the French had really good guns. The French were great at artillery warfare. And I wonder if that's to do with Napoleonic wars, because Napoleon himself was an artillery commander, and I guess maybe they must really understand the importance of artillery. This war shifts from being about men to being about artillery, and then later being about tanks. Artillery is a really important thing here, and the French have invested really heavy into it. And they have really heavy guns that can actually pierce the bunkers and the dugouts of the German lines. So on the south of the Somme, you get really, really effective work between the Germans and the French. Yeah. They pierce through very effectively, and they actually are able to capture some of their targets on the first day. On the north, however, it's a bloodbath. It's just nasty. So the Allies threw around 1.5 million shells in Germans' lines. They tried to take them out their dugouts, but like I said, they were dug in about 30 feet below the surface. They were around 50 yards apart, and there were about 30 men in each of these bunkers. Also about 30% of the shells thrown onto the German lines were defective. So there was just loads of unexploded ordnance, or just didn't reach their targets, or just, failed to do what they wanted to do. Also, what the Allies didn't understand about the Germans is that they had about 3 lines deep of trenches. Right. They didn't keep their army in the first line of trenches. Yep. They kept the provisional defences there. But the reserve line, the second line behind the first line of German defences, is where they kept all the army. Right. the Germans did this because they knew that the English artillery couldn't reach the second German line, so they would keep their men there, and then as soon as they heard the whistles, or what we like to do in the Allies is blow up a mine or a creeping barrage, they would send all their men forward and then man the lines, and suddenly have thousands of healthy, able soldiers to do so.
You can just see it. You can see how all these conditions just come together to create this bloodbath, and it's just so sad how this could have been avoided. And
also, there's no secrecy at all. The Brits are incredibly obvious with their attack plans, and the Germans intercept what their plans are immediately. They don't see the need to be secretive about it.
Interesting.
I guess that's part of their false confidence and thinking that nothing can survive this. And honestly, very similar to the Americans in World War II, who went on to Iwo Jima and Pacific Islands after bombarding it with battleships for weeks and thinking oh, we've got them. But the Japanese had dug really deeply into mountains and trenches and fortifications.
Hard fighters, yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't end well. You think you probably learn from history, but apparently never. Which is why we show the podcast, so we do learn from history in the future.
No one is learning from history, man.
No.
No one's learning. Jesus, have you seen the world today?
Yeah,
Christ.
we're going in a great way. Allied soldiers are lined up in their trenches, and they're instructed by their superiors to simply walk across no man's land. They are not taught to run. They are told to walk in some of the cases in the north and the centre of it. It's crazy. Imagine this. You're being prepared for a massive onslaught that you've been training for weeks. And they're going, you can walk across the lines. Yeah. It's fine. There's this massive stretches with German machine guns pointing at you. And they're like, walk across the lines.
Out of all the horrifically stupid things that generals and everyone decided to do in World War One, without the benefit of hindsight, I will grant. But out of all the stupid things, that might be the most fucked up. I mean, seriously, there's really not much in me that can comprehend why a smart, or should be smart, general that can understand how war works would think that walking into fire is worse than running into fire and trying to avoid it by being there for less time. It is so, basic. I can't... there's so many things in history, especially with these wartime stuff, that is hard to comprehend, especially the brutality. But the number one thing I fail to understand is how many fucking stupid generals on every side would just allow young men that are doing their best for their country to just go up and slowly walk to their death. Honestly, it is revolting that people would have that type of if you're in that position, you should be taking your job a lot more seriously. And I think it's...
I wonder if it's
disgraceful.
I wonder if it's elitism and class separation, because there's far bigger dividing lines between the elite and the working class back then. It's narrowing to a certain extent nowadays. There's more awareness about
in Britain at that time. It was a huge divide. Yeah, I think there's a bunch of factors really, and that would certainly be, I imagine, one of them. I just find it infuriating, and especially when you hear some of the individual stories of some of these people, you just think, oh God. And we're both Brits. We would have had grandparents that would have fought there, or great grandparents that would have fought in it, and everyone we know would also had the same. And it's not just the people that actually fought in it; it's everyone was affected. Anywhere you were, you had men from your town or your city that were going to this conflict, and a lot of them weren't coming back. Everyone in Britain was affected by this conflict. And so when you realise how little certain officers seem to care, and I'm sure most of them did, but the fact that so many seem to not care that much and not worry about it, it's just disgraceful, and it's honestly disgusting.
I don't know if you recently watched All Quiet on the Western Front, which is the German film about their offensives in 1918.
Yes.
Which is basically when the war was ending. Yeah. And these young kids are so excited to get to the war because it's almost ending, and they want their piece of the fight. Yeah. And these horrible generals at the top of it. Yeah. Who existed in real life. There's Hindenburg, Ludendorff and Hindenburg, who were praised by the German country after the war, when they were they're war heroes. But they actually just sent millions of men to their deaths. They knew they couldn't win, and were just we've got to be strong. We're Germany. We don't back down. We're going to fight. And they just sent and the film, to its credit, portrays it beautifully.
It does. It's actually a really good.
If you haven't seen it, it's
recommend it. It's certainly one of the best movies for showing the brutality of war. And World War One, like we said before, is one of the most brutal. So it's a really good showcase of that. What I would say is that I wouldn't even say it's those officers necessarily are just thinking from this perspective of we're strong, we're Germany, we can't surrender like this. I guarantee you, a
Personal
big part of it is ego as well.
Yeah.
They don't want to be shown up. They don't want to look like they're the scum of history. They don't want to look like they've just lost and been beaten down and got nothing to show for it. They want to have that last hurrah. They want to have that last throw of the dice. They want to have their name remembered in a different way.
Yeah,
so they're literally having their own. They're focusing on their own legacy and their own personality more than the lives of the men that they have.
But we remember you.
We do,
We're
yeah.
here.
Well, that's
We're
the
here. We
beauty.
know who you are.
That's the beauty of history. Is often you can see that some people were utter scum, and maybe they thought that they were good when they were alive, and now history looks on them in a much worse light. And I'm happy that this has happened for a bunch of stuff. Interestingly, it's the ones that were against the grain that were often they made the right choice. That when at the time they thought they were going to be remembered as disgraces to their country, and afterwards were actually known as, fair enough. For example, the in Stalingrad, the German Paulson, was that his name?
Von Paulus.
Paulus. Yeah, Paulus, with Hitler, telling him to keep on fighting and stuff.
He wanted to save the lives.
And he wanted to save the life of his men. And it's like, at the time, everyone would have thought on the high command, what a coward. This guy is not going to have a good space in history. And now we look back and go, well, at least he just cared for the lives of his men, more so than a vast majority of generals do.
You're spot on. Across the Battle of Somme, there are some successes dotted in there, like the Ulster Division, who fought really well to take their objectives, but then were pushed back because they didn't have enough reinforcements. So there is some good on what is otherwise an incredibly bleak day. For the north side, the Alpes Road around Serre, which is the particularly most brutal, where the worst fighting's happened, all the way up to Gommecourt, which is about as far north as the battle stretches, is where the majority of the casualties suffered by British forces occurs. The shells did not explode, they didn't break up the no man's land, they didn't break up the barbed wire, and you just have British armies just walking straight head on into just completely entrenched fortified positions. I want to take a quick aside quickly, just to talk to you about PALS battalions. Do you know what they are?
No, is this the same concept of pals as in, friends, that you're a battalion of literally just your mates that you signed up together with?
Yep, that's it. So PALS battalions are a bit of a sign of the failings of the First World War for the British forces. For those of you who don't know what they are, they're quite synonymous with the Battle of the Somme. They're basically allowing the units of the army which allow people from the local towns and villages to all fight together in the same unit with each other. And this kind of inspires volunteers to come forward, because they're like, we'll fight with our mates.
Yeah.
You can't let Henry go and leave Thomas and George alone.
Yeah.
Like, we've got to be there and fight together. So you get thousands and thousands of young kids signing up en masse because they want to fight with their mates and they want to be the only one left out. And you get notably among them, you get the Accrington Pals, the Leeds Pals, the Grimsby Chums, the Sheffield City Battalion, these places up in the north, which are eventually completely decimated by the cost of the first day of the Somme, which is brutal. Sounds nicer, doesn't it? Just serving with a group of your mates.
It does sound nice.
I'm sure nothing bad will come of that.
Yeah, I mean, from the perspective of the boys, why wouldn't you? I mean, Jesus, it'd be so much fun. You know what I mean? What are you laughing about?
Kicking about the boys.
Yeah, have a little kickabout, then you go fight some wars, come back, have another kickabout. They're not going to advertise how shit trench warfare is either.
No,
so they're going to have no idea of where they're fighting. They're just going to have this romanticized version of, hey, let's go out there and let's have some fun together, lads. Let's kill some Germans, eh?
So it's Saturday, 1st of July, 1916, 7:30 a.m. This is it. The big offensive. We're going over the top. We're going to win the war. That's what they said back then. They said it. We're going over the top. Because we're crawling out our trenches over the barbed wire.
Well, if you're watching the visual podcast and you can see what we've got, it's a very classic picture from World War One. It's literally men climbing over the top of a trench. This is actually quite a small trench in comparison. It doesn't really even look like a trench in comparison to a lot of other. Usually they're much taller. But yeah, this is essentially exactly that, them going over the top. So
the mines explode. They've been tunneled by British channelers during this time. And the men rush out of their bunkers and they begin making their way across no man's land to assault the German lines. And then the German guns start ringing out. Waves of bullets, shells, barrages of machine gun fire spread across no man's land. The British ranks around the Alpes Road and in the northern sector are absolutely brutalised. Within the first 30 minutes of the battle, tens of thousands of soldiers are dead or wounded. And within the first day, there are almost 60,000 casualties, with almost 20,000 Brits dead. We talked about the PALS battalions before. Do you know how they're doing?
Not really, but I feel like I'm going to know.
I can tell you how they're doing, because
please,
you want to know. The Accrington pals, 720 participated. Bear in mind, all friends.
So 720 young men from the same
from
town of Accrington
all participated.
All together at this battle.
584 of them were killed, wounded, or missing. The Leeds pals...
In what? The first half an hour?
First half an hour. The Leeds pals, 900 participated, 750 lost. The Grimsby Chums and the Sheffield City Battalion, all friends, all from the same area, all men in what are not big places, have apparently lost half their men. In a lot of these cases, these young men have only walked about 5 meters from their lines.
To get 5 meters is honestly quite impressive. I guess when there's so many men doing it at the same time, they can't kill them all at once. So some men do get further.
No Man's Land is different in some places. Sometimes it's feet apart. Sometimes you can hear the German voices in the night.
Yeah.
Whereas sometimes you're a couple hundred yards away.
Yeah.
It's different each places, but the fact that it's just as soon as they're up, they could literally have seen someone crawl out of their trench ahead of them who got immediately shot in the head.
Yeah.
And they just have to immediately follow him.
Yeah.
Get up behind them and suffer the exact same fate.
Yeah.
And behind them, their sergeants and their officers are
yelling
blowing with, get out, over the top. This is the moment, we got to go. If you don't go, we're not going to win the war. It's a hellscape. The name for these PALS battalions, or the epitaph that goes along with them, is 2 years in the making, 10 minutes in the destruction. Interestingly as well, there are Newfoundlanders, which it's a British territory in Canada, Newfoundland.
Newfoundland.
It's spelled Newfoundland, but I think it's pronounced Newfoundland. Right. 800 Newfoundlanders go out on the first day. 710 casualties are suffered within 20 minutes.
710 out of 800.
Yeah. It's a lot of these battalions suffering 90 or 80% casualties in the first day. It's insane. It completely decimates thousands of units. And Lieutenant Alfred Bundy, this is his eyewitness account of what happened on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. He says this: "Went over top. After an interminable period of terrible apprehension, our artillery seemed to increase in intensity, and the German guns opened up on no man's land. The din was deafening, the fumes choking, and visibility limited owing to the dust and clouds caused by exploding shells. It was a veritable inferno. I was momentarily expecting to be blown to pieces. My platoon continued to advance in good order, without many casualties, and reached halfway to the Boche line. Suddenly, an appalling rifle and machine gun fire opened against us, and my men commenced to fall. I shouted down, but most of those that were still not hit had already taken cover. I dropped in a shell hole and occasionally attempted to move to my right and left, but bullets were forming an impenetrable barrage, and exposure of the head meant certain death. None of our men was visible, but in all directions came pitiful groans and cries of pain." It's tough, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty sad.
So it makes you cry, but it does, doesn't it? It's tough. Charles Bartram, another person who served on that day, said that from that moment, all my religion died. After that journey, all my teaching and belief in God had left me, never to return.
Unsurprising, really, considering.
So the first day, we have the immediate step over the lines. Their whistles over the top. They've been met by this barrage of fire, this incredible just lines and lines of German machine guns just battering the British forces in areas where the artillery hadn't hit them. There are some successes. Like I said, the Ulster Division had successes. On the southern side, they captured Metz and Montauban, and like I said before, Foucault, Maricourt, some areas around the southern side of the Albert Bapaume Road. But importantly, this very quickly becomes an attritional war. It becomes, and war of attrition is basically throwing loads and loads of manpower and equipment for very, very, very limited gains.
It's a numbers
It's
game.
what the Russians are doing in Ukraine right now, which is throwing thousands of men at very small objectives, trying to take one by one, because they know they can keep it up.
The numbers over Ukraine, the numbers of manpower and the numbers of money.
Yeah. And you do an attritional war. You conduct that when you have I guess you know that the men are expendable. You don't mind it going for ages to take a small swathe of land if that's what's going to eventually win the war, which it might do.
Yeah.
The offensive on the north side, thankfully, is very quickly abandoned, and the successes in the south are highlighted as where the resources need to be expended. The battle does not end on the first day. This battle goes on for 4 months, but thankfully they realise the northern area of the Somme is just too fortified, it's too entrenched. They cannot break through there. So there were obviously a few small victories, and there became this sort of tug of war of Allied forces going into an area, trying to take a town. The Germans would counterattack, and this led to the bite and hold strategy, which I said earlier. And the Germans typically didn't have a good answer to that, so the Germans would sustain casualties, trying to fight back and regain the positions, but the Allies would hold in some of these very limited objectives.
Every day fighting. So like 4 months. I'm sure that some days are more heavy.
Yeah. So like there's big phases in it. So a big one is, which I'm about to talk to you about, is the Battle of Flers-Courcelles. And I thought you might like this one, Joe, because it was importantly the first time tanks are used to support an operation in the Western Front.
Yes.
It was basically an Allied attack to break through the German lines to take a number of towns around the southern bank of the Somme. There were massive casualties afflicted the German defenders. And importantly, I think this is because they started using tanks, which made trench warfare really difficult because tanks can just climb over the trenches.
For years, this fighting has literally just been men going at each other, and if you're in the defensive position, sure, you're terrified, but you know you're in the good position. If you're in the defensive position, you know realistically that the person that's running at you, you've got a better chance of killing them than they do of you. But if suddenly a machine is coming towards you in a time where machines are not a thing in the same way that they are today, of course, mate, you'd freak the fuck out. You'd be like, whoa, what the hell is that?
So apparently it petrified the Germans. Like, they literally abandoned their positions because they were so scared about it. But imagine that. Like, there's eyewitness testimonies of Allied forces saying, I'm glad they were on our side because you can't stop them. They didn't have anti-tank guns there. They didn't have, like, sophisticated weaponry that could take them apart. Maybe an artillery shell, but, like, they had to zero in on them effectively. And they can't do that. An eyewitness account says they were little forts running along with their bellies. And as they went, they picked up all the metal they could find, barbed wire and the stakes holding it down. And when they got to the German lines, they just pitched it over to them and killed the lot. This defines the future of warfare. And
absolutely.
And very clearly, some sides, developed really well into tank warfare. Like in World War II, the Germans really developed from. I wonder if
learn from their mistakes.
I wonder if the fact that they had experienced tank warfare. First things first, might lead to some like generational trauma or like idea.
I wouldn't call it trauma, but I think that they certainly, a clever nation that advances a war does it by learning from their mistakes or just learning what we're going to do what they did to us last time, but we're going to do it better. That is, that of course, that's absolutely, definitely was shaped by it, 100%.
So during this part of the battle, 49 tanks were set to be deployed. And only 36 actually made it to the front because at this point, it's the Mark 1, British Mark 1 tank. They're incredibly unreliable.
Yeah.
They can't make it to objectives. They go very, very slowly. It's horrible inside. People inside the tanks talk about seeing machine gun fire make the walls of their tanks hot. They can see like the metal on the inside just like starting to burn up from the heat of the fire.
Was it the Brits that created the tank first?
Yeah,
was it us?
It's because
it's
Winston Churchill loves tanks. Winston Churchill thought it was a future of warfare, so set up a department specifically for the development of tanks. The tanks weren't that successful. Some achieved their objectives, with 3 used at Flers being very effective. German soldiers, like I said, were shocked and terrified. The tanks cleared the way, and the infantry were able to take possession of the villages, albeit at a big cost, which is when you take a village or a town in World War I, it's going to be at a huge cost.
Yeah.
What the Allies do really well here is they learn from their mistakes, and they learn that to actually advance here, they know they can't just spray artillery over a massive front. They start dialing down and concentrating their artillery to fewer sections of the front. Yeah. So they start battering lines with loads of heavy guns, hundreds of heavy guns over very, very short distances, unlike what they did before. Right. They start wearing down and breaking down German defenses and then going and grabbing the village. And they start having a lot more successes. This is the important thing about the Somme. It is horrible. It's atrocious. The fighting is awful. And there's a really unprepared military before this. But after the battle, after the fighting, you have really experienced officers who understand trench warfare. They understand how to get objectives, how to hold them down. And this kind of helps. You could say the failures that the Allied forces suffered in the Somme leads to the successes in 1917 and eventually the victory in the war.
Yeah, of course. It didn't need to be that brutal for them to learn it, though. You didn't. Need, sure, you're getting a lot of data from 60,000 Brits killed in one day. Of course, you're learning a lot.
If you didn't, it'd be horrible.
But Jesus Christ, you'd fucking hope they'd learn something by then.
The final battle of the offensive is the Battle of Ancre. So the Battle of I think Tiefel was the 26th of September, which is about midway through, and then you got the Battle of Ancre, which is the 13th to the 18th of November, and this is basically the Fifth Reserve Army, the British, attacking to exploit the Germans because they're super exhausted. They can't keep fighting, and it's just still stalemate. The winter's setting in.
Yes.
The no man's land is not fit to cross anymore. If you know anything about warfare, you know you cannot fight in winter because it's so horrible. All the roads are bogged down. It's muddy. It's wet. It's cold. Your units aren't prepared. The equipment's failing.
Your troops are cold because they're not prepared. When you're fighting a war and you need every piece of money for every piece of equipment and guns and stuff, you end up having to cut costs on stuff like coats. And often troops are freezing and they're literally surviving on the bare minimum.
And they can't wage offensives because you need really high morale, really well-equipped troops to be able to make breakthroughs, and they can't do that. So they captured some areas. They tried to assault Serre again, which is the village I said on the first day. This is in the northern side of the bank of the Upper Palm Road. They can't take Serre again. Serre basically does not get taken at all. It's a fortified position. They keep trying to take it, but they cannot do it. But they do take areas around it, such as Beaumont Hamel. So that's the final battle of the Somme, the Battle of Ancre. And that's it. It's finished. The Somme Offensive has been going on for 4 months. And guess how much territory the Brits have taken, the Allied forces have taken?
Not much.
It's not much.
Not much.
They've taken about 10 kilometres, 6 miles into German territory.
And what's the total casualties?
Oh, 1.2 million.
1.2 million.
On all sides. The point of the Battle of the Somme is it's an attrition war. It's to take the pressure off the French at Verdun. It's to put the pressure onto the German war machine and really make them hurt. And the Somme does do that. The Germans have lost hundreds of thousands of men. And they can't, because of the Somme, they can't really keep fighting the rest of the war. In 1917, they had to retreat to the Hindenburg Line because they can't keep fighting this war on the front foot. So essentially the Somme and Verdun together win the war for the Allies because there's so much casualty on the German side they can't replenish. They have to retreat and take its defensive policy and invite the French and the Germans onto them. In that year, from the Battle of Somme and Verdun, like I said, the Germans have lost 1.5 million men. They've had to retreat. They can't now win the war from this position. They do eventually get to the stage where in 1917 the Russians surrender. There's so
that's another Pint-Sized History episode, the fucking Russian Revolution.
So the Russian Revolution happens, the Bolsheviks take over. So
Lenin, here we go, it's commie Reds. God, it really just set the scene for everything else, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? So they frees up a lot of manpower for the Germans, they pull over loads of soldiers from the Eastern Front, and they try and launch offensives in 1917, 1918. But these go particularly badly. The Germans lose millions of men in these offensives.
Also, the Americans are now getting involved, right?
The Americans got involved in 1917 because they keep getting fucked by...
No, the Zimmerman telegram. That's why. Basically, the Germans this entire time were like, fuck, wouldn't it be good if, like, somehow because we're constantly worried that the Americans are, like, you know, getting in the way. They're constantly supplying stuff to Europe. They're giving France and England all this stuff. Wouldn't there be a good way to, like, just fuck them off, you know, just get them out of the way? So they thought, oh, I know. Mexico. So, I've got it. Mexico. So they literally sent a telegram. This is so like basic, man. This is so dumb. They were just like, fuck, let's tell Mexico to attack the Americans. I don't know what they said to them. I think it was something like, we have proof that the Americans plan to invade you or something, so you should fight them first or some bullshit. I'm not sure exactly what it was. And fucking, as we do, the Brits, we saw the message and we were like, hold on a bloody minute. They're trying to get the Mexicans involved.
We don't do much well. We do spying well.
We love our spies,
We're great
man.
intelligence.
So we were like, hey,
smart boys.
America. And we're like, come on, here we go. This is how we get the Yanks involved.
And the Americans were like, after they joined in, they were so eager to get involved in the battles. So they had like the Battle of Tuberg Forest, and that was a fucking disaster. They were so just like, hoorah, as the Americans are. Let's get involved. And then we'd be like, we've been there for a few years now, and it's not good. Don't go thinking you could just do some amazing thing. And they went on this huge offensive, and it cost them like horrible casualties, I think.
Right.
So the Russians have surrendered because of the Bolshevik Revolution. The Germans have a lot of manpower left, so they go on advances and offensives in 1917, 1918. They fail miserably, and then the Allies just keep winning offensive after offensive. And this eventually leads to 1918 in November, where the armistice is signed. There's a revolution in Germany, and Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicates. And then the formal declaration of the end of the war is later signed in 1919 at the Treaty of Versailles. What a great treaty that was. That never came back to bite anyone, did it?
Yeah, Treaty of Versailles, iconic for being the treaty,
worst treaty ever.
No, the treaty to end all treaties, you know? They're like, hey, this treaty's so good, we're never going to have to do this again. This war is going to be the last of all the wars. Yeah. There's no way we do another war after
because this treaty is so good,
yeah,
nothing will ever happen in the future of warfare ever.
We've smashed it with this one, lads. Yeah, well done. The Treaty of Versailles was a complete fuck up. It was awful. It was literally just
disaster.
Like one of the worst things you could do. It completely set the scene for everything that was to come after.
It took a load of German territories away from them, disarmed the army,
beat them down,
imposed huge war reparations, and also helped fuel this idea of the stab in the back myth, which is that the Germans didn't lose the fight on the battlefield. They lost because of the Jewish and the communists and the unsavories in society who have. The German army was still apparently good to go, like they could keep fighting. But they weren't. They were on their knees, and they were ready to surrender.
To be fair, I think you are missing one thing in that, and that is one of the main issues was that the reparations essentially meant that the world was absolving its responsibility in the conflict. They were basically like Britain, France, Russia, even Austro-Hungary and Serbia. They all got just kind of like, look, at the end of the day, we all fought, but we all know whose fault it was. And it was you, Germany.
It's you guys.
And as a nation, when you're already fighting for bread, it's like imagine that you're literally fighting for food because your economy is so dead. You're so dead on your feet. You can't. It's difficult to feed your family, and at the same time, you're getting no sympathy from anyone else because every other country believes you deserve this.
Yeah.
You and your family deserve to starve for what your country's done. Of course, you're going to feel fucking infuriated by it. Of course, you're going to feel like this is an unfair thing. Everyone was involved. It wasn't just us. And when some big man with a moustache starts yelling out that this is unfair, of course, you're going to listen to him. Maybe the other stuff you shouldn't be listening to. But that, I get.
It's not really a moustache, is it? It's like a bit.
A moustache.
No, it's like a little tuft.
Yeah,
it's a tuft. It's not a moustache.
Of facial hair above the mouth. Yeah, it's a moustache. What's wrong with you?
Not all facial hair above the mouth is a moustache.
That's a moustache.
No, it's not.
It's just a type of moustache.
It's a tuft. It's a little tuft. It's a playing field.
Right in the comments. Do you think that Hitler's moustache was a moustache or was it a tuft? That's a moustache, man.
I don't agree. I think it's a tuft if we're defining. I think the real reason why, besides obviously Armistice Day coming up soon, why I wanted to do the Battle of the Somme, is because I think it gives you a really good account of the horror and inconsequential nature of World War One. It's not a necessary war. It's power-hungry empires and people and leaders fighting for, just a bit of land on the map. They want to use some of the artillery and shells they've built up over years, expend some of the army manpower, prove that they're the big dog on the European front, which is like, it's insane. Like, does it not make your blood boil? Like hearing about the human element, these poor kids from these towns shipped together, clustered together. Same thing on the German side, by the way. A lot of kids fighting together and dying together as well in these horrible conditions. There's not enough.
France.
Yep, not enough thought given to these poor people involved in all sides of the conflict who are literally just essentially took. At least in World War II, you have an understandable objective. The objective of fighting against the tyranny of fascism, fighting against Nazism. You've seen what happens at concentration camps. You understand why it's necessary to fight against it.
I mean, that's with hindsight, obviously. Yeah.
You don't see that in World War One. It's just pure greed.
World War II is clear in its objectives, and I think that's part of the reason why it's so well known and so well talked about in current day, and how Hitler's so famous as a personality even to this day is because it's just so clear that what happened. You've literally got this tyrannical regimes fighting to control the world or parts of the world, and everyone fighting against it to stop it. World War One's so much more blurred. It's just nations that want to fight and know that they're on the way to fight and are just kind of this messy line of, like you said, the concert of Europe and trying to figure out exactly where you're at. We're posturing, figuring out, are we the superpower? Who's going to, if the Germans win, do they control Europe forever from this point on? If France win, does that mean that Germany will now be nothing, which, it was what happened, and suddenly Germany had to fight back to gain their identity back as a nation?
Feels like the reason why World War One isn't talked about is because of the shame attached to it. Because you don't see the Band of Brothers and the Saving Private Ryans for World War One. You recently start seeing the All Quiet on the Western Front in 1917 and more sort of films like that. But it's shameful. It's incredibly horrible. Like there's no glory or romanticism towards it. And you do see that in World War One, World War Two, which is why I guess there's no documentation like in popular culture for World War One. I think that's why I want to cover it, because I feel like World War One needs to be touched on more than it is. And it's not at all. It is, for me, it's as horrible, if not more horrible than World War Two. And I think it makes
absolutely.
Trench warfare is a bit stale. Doesn't make great movies.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think the reason that
but the human cost.
World War One maybe isn't as advertising, isn't as exciting to showcase, to show the brutality of war, because a lot of it was the same. It was literally just these horrible, dingy trenches with people going up and dying and then going down and defending, going up and dying. There's not that much that happens, A lot of it is very stalematy. And in the process, it's forgotten about. And it's actually one of the sadder things about trench warfare. It's not only is it one of the grimmest scenarios to be in as a soldier, but you're also not really going to be remembered. There are millions of soldiers in every conflict, but especially World War I, that they won't have any place in history because there's 60,000 of them died taking 5 feet of ground. Thousands and thousands of men died on D-Day. But their stories are much more well remembered because they're taking obvious objectives in very famous landmarks, which you can now go to and see today. You can go to the beaches of Normandy and look at these points that people fought from and the ground that they covered. If you go to the Somme, you're just going to see a field.
So although in some of the places you do see the remnants of trenches there, you see bumps in the hills which show you where the trenches were dug in. At the Battle of Thiepval Ridge, during the Battle of the Somme, there are thousands of Canadians that died during the battle, and thousands of them, we have no idea where the graves are. There's no identifiable area for where these soldiers kind of fought in.
Lost.
It's just shame and mystery is what kind of enshrouds World War One.
Yeah.
So thank you for listening to another episode of the Pint-Sized History podcast. Like I said at the start of the podcast, if you like what you see and you enjoyed watching or listening to us, which I hope you have, please drop us a 5-star review, please. We'd greatly appreciate that.
Absolutely. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.
See you later.
Bye-bye.